30,000 children born of horror. That was the number of children born as a result of systematic rape by South Korean soldiers during the Vietnam War. 30,000 children who are a constant reminder of one of the most savage crimes in history. Entire villages were razed to the ground by brutality. Their inhabitants became victims surrounded by armed and unscrupulous fighters. Resistance was useless. Thousands of women were taken to desolate places where their terrible cries of pain were silenced by the savagery of their attackers. They were groped with their rough, war-worn fingers, slowly destroying their dignity until they were finally pounced on. But that was not the end for the helpless Vietnamese women. Another soldier would pounce on them, and then the next, and one more, a never-ending cycle of violence. In this new military history video, we will learn about the horrifying sexual abuses that marked the lives of Vietnamese women forever. Get ready to hear their testimonies and discover how far human cruelty can go.
Đi đâu á rồi nó vô nó uống nước cái xong cái nó kéo tôi vô trong buồng á, rồi nó kéo vô trong buồng á, nó hiếp dâm tôi, nó đi việc luôn, chẳng biết ở đâu hết. Hồi nhỏ tới giờ đây là cũng cứ chịu vậy thôi, chứ mình có biết ở đâu mà mình đi tìm đi tòi đi hỏi. Đâu có biết tìm ở đâu nữa, mà đi tìm đi kiện ai đi hỏi ai. Số phận mình vậy mình chịu thôi chứ đâu không biết đâu. Hồi thời đại chiến tranh mà.
Stories like these embody the horror of what many Vietnamese women suffered during the war in their country. Rape became one of the most common crimes during the conflict, and it is estimated that there were around 10,000 victims of all ages, from little girls to adults and elderly women. The coalition that had the United States as its main power is the one pointed out as the most responsible for the savage crimes. But the perpetrators of the abuses were not the Americans, but their allies in South Korea. The pain that they spread throughout Vietnam was engraved in the bodies and minds of the victims, who generally led a humble life in the different villages of the country. Far from the big cities, they worked the land and had dreams of getting ahead. Dreams that were replaced by the brutal traumas of foreign soldiers. These women believed that they were safe from the shadows of war, although they were aware of the thin line that separated them from terror. Suddenly, a storm of fury shattered the fragile peace in the most violent way possible. Guns fired and screams echoed from the shadows that lurked. Soon, cruelty took hold, and one of the first women to see how her life was about to change was Tran Thi Ngai.
Hồi đó là cô con gái. Chỉ hồi cô đi học y tá bên Tiêu Hòa, học của y tá cô đỡ. Hồi kia thời gian cô còn học trình độ mới cỡ lớp 4 thôi à. Rồi ở nhà ông cha con là rất là người là hồi xưa ông có trình độ, thành thử ông cho cô đi học hết, rồi cô đi học qua học cô đỡ y tá. Giờ mấy cô mới gặp ông mà quất đây, ông cứ theo ông chồng cô miết vậy á.
Although by the summer of 1967, the woman was already working as a midwife and nurse, that morning she was taking care of her parents' store in South Vietnam. Suddenly, the soldier she had seen so many times following her steps walked through the door of the store. The man was in uniform, had grenades hanging everywhere, and a huge rifle slung across his back. He bought some items and approached the counter. He extended his arm to Tran with the money, while she watched him cautiously. A strange feeling invaded her. Fear spread like fire inside her, but she tried to remain calm and act as naturally as possible. The woman hesitated for a moment, but then she also reached out her hand to take the payment. That was the last moment of innocence in her life. The South Korean soldier grabbed her arm tightly and made her fly over the counter. Then he grabbed her by the hair and dragged her to the back of the store. Tran screamed, cried, begged, but nothing would change her fate. The man threw her into a corner. His eyes were burning with lust, completely ignoring Tran's pleas. She could feel her clothes being torn and exposed to air she had never felt so cold. Her attacker's hands gripped her tightly, leaving marks that would take time to heal. But she knew that invisible marks would soon appear as well. The weight of the South Korean soldier on her was great, but not as great as the one she would have to bear for the rest of her life. The pain was immediate, brutal, heartbreaking. Her tears mixed with the sweat of her rapist as she felt herself slowly dying. She knew that no one would come to save her, and all she could do was beg for the suffering to end. But by then, Tran Thi Nai was already broken. Her body had been transformed into a mere instrument of macabre pleasure. She felt as if her insides had been torn out. As she bled, her skin changed color from the blows. With her mind still lost in pain, the soldier left her on the floor and walked away. Now it was time to face a new life. Tran would never be the same again. But she was not the only one.
Rồi nó thấy mình nó ấy rồi nó dụ nó hãm hiếp mình mà không cho nó quánh. Đó thì mới sợ rồi nó hãm hiếp này kia nọ rồi mấy thằng đó hãm hiếp mình nó đè mình không cho nó đập đầu nó quánh. Sợ nó làm hai ba lần.
Má thấy là hồi đấy là nhà có bán nước á, bán dừa đó, rồi họ đi ra đổ rác, họ tới ngừng đây họ uống sao không biết. Rồi hồi tôi cũng còn nhỏ cũng không để đi chơi cũng hỏi, rồi cái thấy người Hàn Quốc vô hiếp dâm bả, rồi sau này thì vợ chồng về kình cãi rồi ông bỏ bả, ông đi luôn. Rồi người đấy đi đâu mất mình đâu có biết đâu, không biết. Đẻ thằng con năm số 9.
Hearing the stories of other people who had gone through the same suffering as her was no consolation for Tran. On the contrary, sadness took over her entire being. She confessed, "I felt like my life was over." The only thing she could do was channel her energies into work. Keeping her mind occupied would help her forget the horror scene she had been the protagonist of. However, the darkest pages of her story had not yet been written. When she noticed that her belly had grown, she innocently assumed that she was gaining weight. But one day she felt a kick in her belly. The ferocious rape had left deeper marks than she imagined, and a new chapter of fears and suffering began. Her parents were terrified that she was expecting a baby out of wedlock, a great taboo in the country. Their beliefs indicate that women must arrive virgins at marriage. Without understanding what their daughter had suffered, it was now their parents who punished her. "They beat me severely. I didn't want to go on living. I felt dead inside." The level of desperation led Tran to several suicide attempts, although all failed, as if the baby inside her was fighting for both of them. Finally, when she gave birth in February 1968, her parents stopped beating her. She had a daughter whom she named Oan, and as difficult as it is to understand, she wanted the man who had raped her to recognize the little girl in some way. So she decided that her middle name would be Kim, the soldier's surname. All the victims carried their brutally whipped bodies, and as if that were not enough, they had to face a society that, far from supporting them, did nothing but condemn them.
Sự này kia nọ rồi hầu kia người ta em nói mình là con phải gái dầm mà ăn bèo để gì đâu. Mình nó chữa quắt đồ để này kia nọ nó khinh chơi mình. Nói này kia nọ mình cũng là mang cái tiếng ha tôi rồi cho nó khổ khỏi này kia nọ.
As part of this group of women, Tran Thi Ngai lived each day as if she were in hell, and at night her nightmares would transport her back to that scene of horror. She felt like the weight of the soldier on her was suffocating her, and she would wake up screaming, unable to breathe. Shortly after having her daughter, the woman woke up to news that Kim had returned to the village to look for her. The South Korean learned of the birth of the little girl, and shortly afterward he sent another member of his forces to look for both of them and take them to the military base where he was located. Isolated and ashamed, the Vietnamese woman felt she had no choice. She got into the car and set off on the journey to meet her rapist again. The next 2 years were a real torment. Every day she feared for her life and that of her child. Violence was present at every moment. The man was not her partner. There was no love, not even a shred of affection. Tran's efforts to try to put together some sort of family only brought more abuse. She was repeatedly raped by Kim, and no one stopped her. She herself had agreed to enter the lion's den again. The only thing missing from her horror story was the arrival of another pregnancy. And so it was, Tran had her second daughter with the brutal South Korean soldier before he was sent to a new base and abandoned the three of them. The woman, completely hopeless, returned to her parents' home. By this point, the damage was not only physical. Tran was the victim of endless psychological torture. She needed to work to support her children, but she had no one to take care of them while she was away from home. After a while, Kim came back into her life and sent a comrade to help her. The name of this other soldier was Park, and he assisted her by taking care of the little ones. However, the help came at a very high cost for Tran. This man brutally raped her, leaving her injured and with another child in her womb. The Vietnamese woman seemed to be wrapped in a violent curse, which she passed on to her children, who carry the same weight.
Tôi làm bất cứ việc gì, tôi đi đâu trên đường thì bạn bè đặt tôi đi học thì bị thầy cô đuổi. Họ cứ ganh ghét, họ cứ coi tôi giống như kẻ thù. Tôi nhớ có lần những cái bạn tôi đánh tôi, bảo tôi như này: mày hãy nói mày là ai? Tôi bảo tôi là Tì. Nó không chịu, rồi nó Tì tí, cũng cức gì mà Tì tí. Rồi nó bảo tôi mày phải nói mày là con chó, bởi vì cha mày là con chó.
Both he and his two sisters became part of the so-called Lai Dai Han. This is the Vietnamese term used to refer to and discriminate against people born to South Korean parents during the war. Approximately 350,000 South Korean soldiers were deployed in the country to take part in the conflict, and many of them did not hesitate to use against civilians the same violence they used in combat against the enemy. This is how a huge number of innocent women suffered atrocious sexual abuse. There was no mercy. While Vietnam burned, its inhabitants were whipped in the most atrocious ways. Their bodies were no longer their own, and the fate of the babies they carried was to share in this endless suffering.
Giờ đó giờ tuổi thân mà nghĩ tới ở đó hận là để con không có cho nó ăn học được, khổ do nó hận không nhờ ai được hết.
The Lai Dai Han community faced social exclusion due to their mixed ethnicity. Many did not have the opportunity to attend school, and most did not have access to basic health services. All of this was accompanied by a social stigma that made them fall into shame and constant prejudice. Furthermore, South Korea does not recognize the crimes committed by its men, and this led the Vietnamese government to prohibit women from giving their testimony about what happened, so as not to jeopardize the commercial relationship between the countries. However, the victims, tired of keeping quiet about the enormous misfortune in which they were involved, have been demanding recognition and an apology for years.
Chỉ là cô cũng khổ mà, cô cũng xấu hổ biết bao nhiêu, hiếp dâm cô rồi bỏ cô khổ, cô khổ, cô giấu không biết chữ, làm cực cô bỏ lên bỏ chuồng, ai nuôi nấng hết.
South Korea has made its own campaign for victims of sexual violence during World War II, but it turns a deaf ear to the events in Vietnam. Faced with this, Tran Thi Ngai said that she and all the other women who have lived for long decades in hell are looking for a change that will offer them peace of mind. In her view, an apology would give her community a desperately longed-for closure and help her children to be better accepted in Vietnamese society. We are not victims. We are survivors. We are mothers, fighters, and defenders of justice. Our stories deserve to be heard. Our pain deserves to be recognized. We are all getting older and tired. We want to die knowing that there is hope for women who suffered sexual violence and that their descendants will not share the suffering and shame that have darkened our lives. This is the way they found to face the trauma they could never forget, the memories that will continue to torment them in every dream, the pain that returns every time they close their eyes. However, their stories will continue to be a cruel reminder of the absolute horror that women suffer in times of war. a battle that turns them into silent victims, discarded bodies, lives broken by a violence that knows no limits or mercy. Now, after having seen the most brutal rapes during the conflict in Vietnam, the time has come to say goodbye. Thank you very much for accompanying us to the end. We look forward to seeing you again in our next military history video.